Hello everyone, I am Prichi
And I am Michelle,
and we are going to discuss the language and creative process. Let's start!
Language, more specifically human language, refers to the grammar and other rules and norms that allow humans to make utterances and sounds in a way that others can understand. What is a brand language? The term brand language refers to the body of words, phrases, as well as terms which an organization uses in order to describe its purpose or in reference to the products which it sells. Brand language is utilized in marketing in order to help consumers to connect particular words or ideas in particular companies or products. When talking about brand language definition, there are two major questions you have to ask. First, who is your audience? And what does your brand stands for? Who is your audience? This is a question that every brand needs to ask itself to help define its brand voice. After all, without your audience, you don't have your brand identity. Let's go back to when we talk about the different techniques and strategies tied to brand identity. For the sake of finding your audience, there are a few strategies that have stood the test of time and remained fan favorites. Let's discuss three of the most widely used. First is the user personas. Otherwise known as buyer personas, creating user personas has been a go-to method for many brands when it comes to understanding who is using their products or services. This process typically goes a little beyond the average chat box. Creating these personas involves asking users a series of questions via surveys and interviews and finding patterns in their answers. Once you have enough interviews and surveys completed, you can begin to create personas to better understand your audience. It's not overly complicated, nor does it require any special skills. However, depending on the number of people in your audience, it can take quite a while. It helps tremendously to have a few analytics tools handy during this period. Possibly one of the most effective and straightforward ways brands understand their audiences is just by talking to them. That's all there is to it. These conversations can manifest in a variety of different ways, but quick emails, phone calls, or face to face interactions have always been the most effective ways to get to know your audience. There are benefits in listening to your customers. Your customers, better than anyone, know how you can improve on your brand. If anything, this is a great practice to help improve your customer relations. Everyone likes a brand that's involved. You may be asking, what's the point in all of this? Well, I'm glad you asked. The whole point in understanding your audience is to understand their behaviors. To understand what makes them tick when they're buying from your brand means that you can focus your efforts in marketing your brand identity based on those behaviors. It's not overly complicated, but this sort of research does wonders for any brand when trying to define brand voice. Lastly, read customer reviews. 80% of 18 to 34 years old have written reviews, proving that customers are talking about you whether you're listening or not. Read reviews to understand what customers want from your brand. You'll see where you are providing the most value and understand how your product or service is being used. In addition, reviews provide content from the mouths of your customers you can repurpose and use in your marketing materials, ensuring it is, without a doubt, a voice with relevance. What does your brand stand for? It's fairly obvious to say that in order to understand your brand language, you have to understand what your brand stands for. Each and every brand on the market today has a specific image it wants to portray. So, now that you've established who your audience is, there are important questions you have to ask yourself to further define brand voice. First, what's your brand's culture? Second, what's your brand's mission? What's your brand's culture? Yes, even brands have cultures. Brand language is similar to culture, as they both help define a brand, but culture takes a more direct approach. Think of it like this: brand culture is the DNA of a brand, and brand language is how the brand organizes itself. Brand language stands for the vibes that the brand puts out into the world. It's the brand tone. You can see that these two have a lot to do with each other. Defining your brand language means first defining your brand culture. How do we do that? First, you have to define your brand values, people, and purpose. Find out what your brand stands for. Then, it's just a matter of displaying that for everyone to see. Make these values clear, and your culture will be clear too. What's your brand's mission? This question ties in with the one above, but it's extremely important to the brand language by itself, so it gets a spot of its own. Every brand, no matter the industry, has to have a mission, whether it's to provide quality shoes or educate people on the importance of green energy. You have to have one. Highlighting the mission plays a key role in defining your brand language. Now, let's talk about brand language guidelines. First, write on a variety of topics. Nothing really tests your skills like writing about things you're unfamiliar with. As far as developing a brand language goes, this is a very helpful method. Trying to carry the same tone and language over multiple different topics isn't easy, but it'll help you hone in your brand language. Next, put the audience first. Is your content easy to read? Does it register with the target audience? Does it properly portray your brand language and culture? These are all questions you have to ask yourself. While you want to make sure your brand is represented, you also have to keep the reader in mind. Your content can perfectly represent your brand, but if it doesn't make sense to the reader, then there's no point. Next, format matters. In content marketing is to take everything you learned in high school and college while writing and throw it out the window. In school, we're taught to write very specifically. All of our writing ended up using a slightly different language, but it all looked mostly the same. This becomes a problem in content marketing. The whole idea behind establishing a brand language is to be different. Next, be a perfectionist. Have you ever heard the phrase, "Nobody likes a perfectionist"? Well, in some cases, that may be true, but this isn't one of those cases. Be picky. Read your content over and over again to make sure that it's perfect. You'll notice that as you venture farther and farther into these practices, you'll start to develop your own technique. This is a good thing, as you're already starting to branch out and create your own brand language. Lastly, be open to change. Change. This isn't a word that a lot of people like to hear, but it's an important one when developing a brand language. Unfortunately, change is inevitable. You will absolutely need to be open to changing your brand language. The idea is to create a brand language that portrays your brand, sits well with customers, and help customers, new and returning, identify your brand easily. If your language isn't accomplishing all of those things, it's time to change it up a little.
There are two fundamental components of brand language. First, word choice refers to the vocabulary which is used in the marketing or advertising. Second is tone. It refers to the stance of the advertisement. Tone is not limited to language, as it can also be incorporated through visual elements in addition to the level. These are the brand language examples: BMW, Grove, Whirlpool, Geico. BMW visual brand language is one of the most recognizable in the automotive world, regardless of social status, professional training, or whether one is a fan of the brand or not. People recognize BMW cars not only by the logos, but by specific design elements that made history. A small glimpse of one of the brand's cars is often all it takes for someone to recognize one of its creations, and it has much to do with its visual brand language. Second is groove. Groove is a great example of how brand language changes over time. As its user base increased, so did the need for a change in brand strategy. The brand's mission was to make its users' experience as clean as possible, but still maintain the groovy feeling. Groove did this brand identity revamp in the right way by taking user feedback. Every features, every design, and every single aspect of the new identity was based on what the users wanted. Needless to say, it has worked out and quite well for the brand as its feedback now is incredible. Other than that, it basically rebuilt every branded asset from the ground up. It put together a style guide applicable across all its apps and websites, applying a new modern and clean look to the brand, which led to a new and improved user experience. The groovy feeling, however, was successfully maintained as the new design featured playful elements, elegant new fonts, and fresh colors. Whirlpool. Around the world, Whirlpool owns roughly 28 sub-brands. Each one of these brands promotes products that all have strikingly similar designs, but it wasn't always that way. As we know it now, Whirlpool is probably the biggest supplier of household appliances. It and its sub-brands, like KitchenAid, make just about any appliance you could think of and probably some that you can't. Back in the 1990s, Whirlpool conducted research that proved the lack of brand loyalty. In fact, two-thirds of the customers that entered a store looking for a new appliance had no idea what brand they were looking for. Whirlpool decided to bring designer Chuck Jones on board as its chief designer. Together with the help of design teams all over the world, they created Whirlpool's brand visual language that we recognize today. They created a simple brand language style guide to keep the brand on track. Using a unique design template, Whirlpool was able to unify its brand tone, and its product sales have never been higher. Next, Geico. Geico has done an amazing job at maintaining its culture and language for years. Whether it's the brand catchphrase or the British gecko, it's instantly recognizable. Its brand strategy is simple: familiarize people with the brand by using a funny gecko. It's a character that we've all grown to know and love, even if it is the mascot for an insurance commercial. Gecko took something so simple and mediocre and turned it into a super famous brand, all by including a tiny gecko into the brand language style guide. This is a great approach toward marketing and advertising, as the most simple designs and elements are the easier to remember, adapt, and associate with the company. A complicated design, on the other hand, would have been less effective. Benefits of having a brand language: the ability for a corporation or product to be recognizable across international borders, while other advertising codes can be misinterpreted. Words can be translated to ensure brand unity. Second, it helps brands find the words to say who they are and what they will stand for. Developing a brand language is a marketing tactic that encourages customers to associate specific words or phrases with a company. A product design language solidifies its emotional connection with customers and also leads to increased brand awareness, higher customer retention, as well as longer product life. So now, let's go to the creative process. How does a creative process help? The goal of a creative process in graphic design is to channel time, energy, and creativity in the direction that is in line with a particular project's needs. By its nature, creativity can be hard to harness into a predictable and linear set of stages, but it is the innermost value to do so. A good creative process for logo design and branding greatly improves the opportunity for a successful outcome in a reasonable time frame. The creative process defines and controls cost, time, effort, direction, responsibility, expectation, conversation, collaboration, and goals. Without a creative process, you are shooting at a target in the dark. In creative process, we would have responsibilities. My responsibility throughout the project is to ask the right question, define the creative problem, and visualize a solution. The client's responsibility is to provide the requested information and feedback in a clear, timely, and honest way. Words before visuals. Along with additional research, it is distilled into mind maps, and by using a dictionary and treasures, a lexicon for the project is created. Focusing on words rather than visual at the beginning of a project is a more efficient method of narrowing focus. Mind mapping allows all the information to appear in one place, exposing gaps or differences in thinking. The mind map helps to define the creative problem and path to the solution. Before any visuals are designed, a written creative direction is developed using this information, approved by the client, and they use to guide the remainder of the process. There are 11 steps of creative process structure. First is the arm with purpose. Is a discovery tool that ensures the process is not aimed at making something pretty, but a strategic exercise that demands an investment of time and effort. Is mind mapping. A mind map is a diagram I use internally to organize thoughts, the project's vocabulary, goals, and other information collected about the client's company, product, or service. Third step is the sketching thumbnails. Fourth step is the sketching roughs. Fifth step is design concept. Concepts are refined until they are at a stage that clearly communicates the desired message. Sixth step is design presentation, deck presentation, and feedback. Concepts are presented using a desired presentation deck. The deck provides context, giving real-life examples of the proposed branding in use. Next is the revised design presentation deck. Changes are made to the design as well as any refinements necessary. Step number 8. Presentation and feedback. The revised identity is delivered to the client as a design presentation deck. Referring to the creative brief and creative direction, the client may have slight modification they would like me to explore further. Step number 9. Delivery. All final files are sent to the client via email, including various digital formats of the identity. Also, transferred to the client at this time are full rights and ownership of the visual brand identity. Step number 10. Additional materials. At this stage, we can begin to work on other deliverables. Last step is follow up and support. After the project is completed, keep in touch to answer any question regarding the use of the branding.